Hello and welcome to our webinar tonight on emotional intelligence. I'm really excited that you're all joining us. Thank you for spending this time with us to learn a little bit more about our relationship skills and how we navigate this world. So a couple of housekeeping things before we really jump into the content of today. Just a couple things for you to note. There are a couple handouts that are available in this platform. It's about Cloud9 World, who is one of the sponsors for our webinar tonight, along with Nasco Education. If you have any interest in social emotional learning programs, please do download those handouts and reach out, and we'd love to talk to you more about them. Now, without any further ado, I do want to introduce Dr. Michael Hyland, who is a veteran educator with 32 years of experience. He currently serves as a full-time professor, associate professor, and coordinator of doctoral programs at Southern Wesleyan University. Dr. Hyland previously served on the faculty at Louisiana State University, Shreveport, and Asbury, as well as Asbury University in Kentucky, In addition to serving as a university professor, Dr. Hyland serves the greater educational community as a consulting and professional development person, joining forces with Cloud9 World in the fall of 2019. So without any further ado, I want to hand this over to Dr. Michael Hyland, and he can teach us so much more about emotional intelligence.
Well, thank you. I don't know if I can teach you so much more, but it's a pleasure to be with you and to share this evening with you. I'm sharing my journey with you through this PowerPoint, through this time. Hopefully you'll enjoy or take away something new or enjoy what has been shared with you. The key to understanding this webinar is it's about journeys we take as teachers. This is a compilation of my journey, two journeys that intersected at the same time. The journey of my life as a principal, a high school principal, and the journey of my life as a father and husband. And so my work in social emotional intelligence came about a couple of decades, over a few decades ago. I'm just starting to show my age, the gray here shows it, okay. I was a principal at the time and had come home from work to find my two daughters sitting, at the time, the oldest daughters, I'll explain my feeling in a second, sitting inside the door. They were 5 and 3 at the time, holding hands, talking to each other kindly. You have to understand this was not a common occurrence in my household. So when I turned, my wife immediately came over to explain. She saw the look on my face that I was confused. And she explained to me that my two daughters had been fighting with each other. And she wanted to redirect their anger towards each other in a positive way. And then she said to me, what would you have done? I was a high school principal. I'm somewhat sarcastic and probably not safe in this situation. I said, I'm a high school principal. I would have suspended him for 3 days, and that would have solved the problem. She let me live. She didn't get upset with me. But it really got me thinking, is that really what we're all about in education? You know, is it really what we've come to, that we just look at these rules and regulations and don't go deeper? We have a real focus on academics. We had a character. We were getting into the start of character education, but we were really looking at the whole child and what we were doing with our students. And that's when I began investigating and getting into emotional intelligence. Dan Goleman's work on in multiple intelligence, Howard Gardner. This idea that whenever I hear someone say, oh, that's just child development, social development, and we often leave out emotional development, and there are some other developments in there too. So this is about that journey and what it is. But so let me tell you a little bit about me. I am from Cambridge, home of Harvard University, outside of Boston there. I've been married 26 years. I do have 6 children, 5 daughters, 1 son. I actually have a son-in-law now, starting last year. I spent 13 years as a teacher, secondary math, both urban and suburban settings, and then 16 years as a principal, mostly in alternative schools for at-risk students. And my last 8 years have been spent as a university professor. And I share this with you for 3 reasons, okay? Because people always ask me, you know, that's nice, it's good background, but what's important about it? Well, first and foremost, it's the Cambridge part, the Boston, is so you know why I talk about this. Talk the way I talk, okay? I live in South Carolina now. But when you hear me talk, I just don't sound like a South Carolinian. And when I was in Kentucky, I definitely didn't sound like a Kentuckian. So a little bit about my background, so you'll know why I drop off some A's and R's and stuff. I also wanted to let you know that, and as I mentioned, this is coming from a parent's view, an adult's view. This is not just something I've studied in books, but I've experienced as a parent. And then that I've also walked your walk. I've just in K-12 education. My career as an educator is not unique to a university professor. I've seen university professors who've never spent time in a K-12 building trying to say how you should do it right when they themselves have never had that experience. I have. So this is a compilation of those journeys, and it's about relationships, the relationships we develop in various journeys on our walk in life. So what about relationships is important to know? Well, humans are made for human relationships, okay? We know it from the neurobiological field, okay, where the importance of relationships during those early years is emphasized in research over and over again. But I love the part where research shows that you want to improve not just school achievement, but you look at some of these other things and you get down to physical and mental health, social skills, general well-being. If schools lost their purpose on those later parts and become too heavily focused on the academic achievement, okay? So that's why I get into emotional intelligence. The psychological component, okay, we know that from the research in the 90s. And to point out, I was doing this when I was studying about neglect as a principle. One of the neglects that was often overlooked is the failure to provide an emotionally nurturing environment, okay? This says the emotional nurturing necessary, but that environment that is emotionally nurturing. And I just love this one. I put it in there because I think it's fun. It is not good for man to be alone. And I say this because if you read this, if you read the Old Testament, the Bible, and you see this is a case where man and God are alone. They have each other. And yet God says it's not good for him to be alone. He needs human relationships as well. So we know this is very important. And so that leads into emotional intelligence, this aspect of how do we emphasize positive relationships in schools or as adults with our own children, okay? I will point this out. I always joke that I'm the Edison of emotional intelligence. Edison found the right way to make the light bulb. If you don't know, it took him 1,000 tries. 999 times he didn't find the right way of doing it. He made mistakes until he found the right one. This is my journey of the mistakes I've made over time and to learn what I think is an excellent approach to working with emotional intelligence, okay? One of the interesting things about relationships, though, is as educators, we're interesting beings, okay? What we expect of our students, sometimes we don't of ourselves. And I'll give you an example. When I was a teacher and a principal, I would want students would come to me, and I'd want them to give me some of the deepest, be open and honest, share deep hurts, deep issues with me, and be as transparent as possible. Much that I would of a very close friend, or even a relationship I was in, or maybe even a spouse, that feel comfortable that they be open and honest with me. And yet I myself was not with them. There's that sense that I had to keep myself hidden from them. They didn't have to know any more than I was the teacher in front of them. And so I want you to think about that as your relationships. How much do you expose yourself? That's why I started with this. I'm married. I have 6 children. I want you to know I understand relationships. I could talk about failures. I could talk about successes, okay? We also understand that the other challenge for educators is we have many relationships because we're on many journeys. When I move sometimes to a new setting, my wife will point out that her and the children sometimes it's a little bit harder for them to get into things, although my children go to school, so they meet new friends at school. But my wife is a stay-at-home mom, and so she often is isolated for a while. I have friends at work. I don't know friends, but I have people I interact with at work. I have a relationship with people at work. We go to church. We have relationships with people we interact there. Then I have my relationships with my family at home. And you may not, you have maybe at different points in your journeys on those than from where I am. But the key is you have multiple journeys and multiple relationships. And sometimes it's interesting, stop and look and think, how do I respond to one relationship differently than another? And we understand that. That is okay. In many cases, that's where we are. But when we talk to our students, how much of that relationship do we really want? And here's why I say this in growing emotional intelligence in relationships, because emotional intelligence is about relationships. And when I look at the divorce rate, when I look at different things that are happening and breaks out and frustrations, one of the reasons I see this often, it's because of emotional intimacy lacking. Emotional intimacy, by the way, refers to this. There are those in our lives who we want to know better and be more fully known by. Now, I'm not saying that's what I want from my students, okay, what you should want, but you want to help them grow in emotional intelligence so that when they are in a relationship with someone at that level, they grow to emotional intimacy. The whole goal of emotional intelligence is to grow someone to be able to be emotionally intimate with someone that's very important in their lives. There are those in their lives. You want them to know you better, and you want to know them better. And so that's really the key about relationships and emotional intelligence. One of the challenges teachers face, I did, and again, I'm sharing from personal experiences, when I had communication, and it really wasn't communication, is most often it was a one-way flow, unidirectional. It wasn't until later I realized the importance of bidirectional flow in emotional intelligence, okay? When I was doing all the talking, it was because I often had a time frame in mind. It was because it benefited me. But when the student had an opportunity to speak, I was able to understand and learn patience, understand the student better and learn more patience. When I was doing the talking, I defined the relationship. But when the student was afforded the opportunity to share openly, I understood them better and the relationship grew deep. Okay. So one of the things you have to ask yourself is which kind of directional flow do I use? Is it predominantly unidirectional? And there are times in that for teachers, okay? Or is it really, do I have that bidirectional flow in which I can develop a trusting relationship where the student can learn to trust me and feel comfortable sharing with me? I can't earn a student's trust necessarily because just because of who I am. I want to show them that if they trust me with something, I will honor that trust. Okay. And so, because I know the power of a trusting relationship can never be understated when it comes to emotional development, intelligence development of our own and of our students. Okay. Something just to think about. I throw this one in here because I had a teacher once say, well, okay, so I understand social emotional learning, emotional intelligence, but why the need? Why do we really have to do this? And I love this quote from Thomas Lacone. I just throw this, but I'm going to get to the subject in a second. Because a child is the only known substance on which a responsible adult can be made. It is one thing to be intelligent, but I can show a lot of people who are extremely intelligent. I can point to multiple examples of people who were geniuses, but lacked character, lacked emotional intelligence. A real simple example would be Hitler. Okay, just because someone's intelligent doesn't mean they're a good person. Good, and they need to grow. When we talk about child development, I go back to that child development concept. When we talk about child development, do we only talk about academic in education? In parents, I've seen in parents, they mainly talk about physical and psychological. They often leave that emotional out, and we'll talk about that in a second. Okay, so it's very important that we are thinking in terms of emotions. Okay, I had one person tell me this: well, we want to produce good citizens. Okay, and I asked this, and a friend got offended by it when I said, what does it mean? How do you measure? What does it mean to be a good citizen? How do you measure it? Because when I asked them, what is your measurement tool? They didn't actually have one. Of course, they just had the standardized tests they gave. Okay. So they said, well, one person I asked said, well, we have a great character education program. And some of my friends have had schools that have won National Character Ed Awards. And that's great. So is it enough to produce citizens who have good character, honest, responsible, law-abiding citizens? What do we see? Something more? Do we really want citizens who not only manifest those traits, but go further by actively taking leadership roles in the community for the sake of improving conditions of its members? Okay. Or should we go even a step further and produce citizens who seek to solve societal issues and challenges through questioning and challenging? And I will say this, developing one's strong their emotional skills and their emotional intelligence and social skills is a key component of number 3, okay? Because you don't want rebels. You want people who take a good approach to making a difference. So why then, and I had this, I was sitting at a table once with talking when I was a principal to one of the teachers, said, well, isn't this the responsibility of the parents? Now, this was an alternative school, so I gave him an example, and it was somewhat along this one. We had a real live example in our building, okay? And I always list this when I go speak and do professional development at different schools. This is one I like to put up there and share, okay? And say, okay, what are 5 observations that stand out? Now, you could type, I can't see the chat, and I can imagine what people usually share, but I'll tell you what some of the more that come to mind. They immediately point to the dad, obviously not being involved with the child, okay? True. If you look at it, there's this disconnect between the parent and child. I love that he's questioning, where is this violence coming from? Now, I'm not getting into, this is not an issue or any statement on gun control, whatever. I'm looking at the issue of what role does social emotional learning play in some of the things we're seeing with interactions to schools at the simplest level, not only the bigger levels, okay? It's this idea that we're not investing in the future generation emotionally, okay? And instead, the students playing. I love this one, Cop Killer is what they have. The number 1 seller at the time when I used this was Grand Theft Auto. You know. Now, research doesn't necessarily show one way or another on the impact of playing such violent games on actual things that students' behaviors. However, it is important to note that there's still not that positive growth going on. Okay. One of my favorites was a lady raised her hand and said, yeah, the mom's not in the picture. She left the dad alone with her son, and I laughed. And it is true. The woman not, and I will say this, I did a research project for 2 years on some social emotional development and found that the students who were most often to be in the alternative school, over 90% of them, about 90% of them actually, came from broken homes where it wasn't biological mom and dad married in their home raising their child. They were somewhere had different names and different places and lived with grandparents or whatever. So it is hard on a single parent to play a role because they often have to work on things. So they can't be invested as emotionally with their child as they want to be. Now, this might be an extreme example. I'll give you an example in my real life. When my children were young, my wife, was a stay-at-home mom with those 6 kids. So I'd let her get away from time to time. I'd send her away and I would be with the kids, And while I didn't have my back turned and wasn't really invested in them, I would say, okay, the time would come and I would know to do chores. Let's do chores. Hey, let's go out and do something fun. Let's just go play. I was going to be good. I was going to play fun. Let's go do something. Let's go out to eat. Let's do this. And my daughter stopped me. I forget which one. Daughter number 2, I think she was 4 or 5 at the time, maybe 6. Said, no, we have to do art first. Mommy always does wants us to think creatively, And then, and throughout the day, they would tell me what the schedule was I had to develop with them. That is important in the development of children. And I had not thought in terms of that. In their emotional development structure was, but also allowing different aspects of their life to be touched upon and the role that played in their emotional intelligence and growth, okay? So ask yourself, when you think about parents, what about your parents? How did your parents express emotions? Did they ignore them? Did they lash out? Did they express them in a safe manner? My parents, if they were upset, if they were angry, not just everybody in the house knew it, we were in an apartment building. everybody in the apartment building pretty much knew that they were mad. They were very expressive about emotions, okay? My wife's parents were the opposite. They tended to hold back on emotions. They didn't share them. They got frustrated with this one quietly away. I think her dad was a little bit stronger. Her mother often just held it in, okay? Now, on one hand, you could say my parents' approach was not a very healthy one. That is true, but at least they were expressing their emotions. Okay, so in some senses, my wife's mother, my mother-in-law, it was a more dangerous situation where they just held it in. Okay, so and the other part of that is, was I learning to express emotions, and how do I now express my emotions? Let me get to that. So, how was I allowed to express my emotions? Which was funny because if I did get frustrated, and that my dad would make sure he squashed that quickly. Okay. And if I didn't respond appropriately, obviously my friends let me know. Okay. So, but the real question is this: now that you're an adult, when you do things, and young person expresses their emotions, I think with my children, I think with my students, do I find myself doing things that were along the line of my parents? Do I respond the way they responded? I remember one time thinking that with something my daughter did, and I responded in a very harsh way, and I thought, oh my gosh, I've become my dad, and I was very disappointed with myself. You know, it led to good conversation with my daughter, which helped. It helped both of us grow. Okay, in terms of what was happening emotionally within both of us, okay, and how we had to learn to manage that. Because I did not grow up in a very healthy, growing very strong EQ. I had to learn it later in life and still battle some of those struggles of embedded behaviors I'm used to, responses to emotions, okay. The thing I want to avoid though is this, and this is actually happening where a student walked in with me once, he walked into my office once and said, Dr. Hyland, I don't know what's wrong with me. And I said, why? He said, because I get angry. Immediately, the emotion, they felt there was something wrong because they feel emotions. And that's the problem sometimes if we're not looking at developing strong emotional intelligence, emotional EQs, we call them emotional quotients in our students, is sometimes they feel what's wrong, that they have a problem because they experience certain emotions, rather than it's not the emotion that's the issue, it's the way you respond to the emotion that's the issue. That's what we want to talk about when we get into developing a strong emotional intelligence in our students. Is we want to make sure that they separate out the emotion from the response and the action, because everyone feels emotions. It's how we respond.
Dr. Hyland?
Yes.
Just to let you know, we had our first question come in,
Sure.
and somebody asked, how do you get over this? How do you get through the stigma of talking about emotions with family and with students?
Ooh, that's a good question. You know, you get through it, and here's what I found: you get through it by just being willing to move forward with the conversation. I sometimes was hesitant for that very reason. I hate to say the simple answer is you just got to keep working at it and keep practicing it, because it can be a taboo subject. That's why it's a great question. But the reality is, in my case, I was like determined to take this on and make a difference and do something. I wanted to do it within myself. I wanted to do it with my children at home, and I wanted to do it with my students. So I had set up conversations with faculty and staff where we could talk about these things and how we're going to do it. And I would talk with students about it. I hope that answers your question. Did that answer?
Yeah, I think that answers. And if not, you can type back in and ask a follow-up. But thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, these are great questions because this is not an easy topic sometimes to talk about. Even in my house, when we want to talk about it, it seems to all of a sudden drift down a different road, and it's one of those challenges you have. Much easier one-on-one, I will say that. So then, here's what I had to do. I decided, okay, if I'm catching myself being like my parents, I'll give you an example of how I knew I was like my parent. The other day, my oldest daughter's home visiting from the University of Louisville, and my wife was gone with the younger two who were at home. They were going out somewhere, and I was downstairs cooking, and all of a sudden I hear this loud noise, and my daughter upset, "Dad, I think I broke my ankle," you know. So I ran up. She had been we have a room above the garage. She'd been up there and decided to do roller skating. And she wanted to learn to do some type of pirouette or one leg move, and it didn't go well. Fortunately, she didn't break her ankle, but it was badly damaged. And I remember thinking, I almost responded like my dad, well, it serves you right for roller skating in the house. And I had to catch myself and say, no. I remember my dad, when I broke my ankle once, he waited because he wasn't sure. And we were poor, so healthcare wasn't as prominent. And he took me to the hospital and waited 2 days. And when we were at the hospital, the x-ray showed that the ankle was actually broken. And my dad looked at me and said, you're only limping because they found out it's broken, you know. And so I always respond differently. I had to catch myself not doing that with my child. Like, I talked with her, I took her roller skate off. I got her ice, I got her up, I took her to the hospital. But I wanted to make sure that I didn't have that type of attitude with her. I wanted to show something more supportive. When we talk about emotions, that's the other key is, well, we'll talk about that when I get to emotion coaching, but that idea that you really want to think, it's hard to do sometimes before you act, because it was fair. My initial response was my parents, and I had to overcome that. Okay. So what is it we want to do? Well, as a teacher, as an adult, I want to be able to relate with students and my children in a manner that allows the relationship to move past the surface level into a deeper understanding and acceptance. If I'm really going to help my children and my students grow emotionally intelligent, the relationship can't be at the surface level. Okay. They really have to trust you, and you have to trust them. So that's why I start with this: be reflective. Like I said, I had to start with me. Okay. I had to learn that, well, I'm going to show you something in a second. Let me get to that now. Get ahead of myself. Okay. So be reflective. Come to a frightening conclusion. This is starting with myself. I want to show you this. This is a great quote I love from Hylen. I've come to the frightening conclusion that I am the decisive element. My personal approach creates the climate. My daily mood creates the weather. I possess the power to make a child's life miserable or joyous. I can be a tool of torture or an instrument of inspiration. I can humiliate, humor, hurt, heal. It is my response that decides whether a crisis will be escalated, de-escalated, humanized, or dehumanized. And I just love this quote, and it made a big difference to me when I came across it in my research, because I stopped and thought, I need to start with me, okay? And recognizing that I did not have a strong emotional intelligence, emotional quotient, okay? I don't know if I want to take that test right now either, but it had to be that I had to look at how I was responding and start deciding daily what things were I going to change that I did that were not productive in helping my students nor my children with their growth, that were hurting or not helping at least. I wanted to become an instrument of inspiration, okay? I wanted to be a healer. And so the first thing adults, educators, teachers have to do is be reflective. How do I respond in the classroom? Okay. I've taken out the slides I had for the sake of time on different responses of teachers to students. Sometime if you want, I can share that with you. It's actually part of a book. This is not a shameless plug because the book doesn't come out until November. I just had published. The publisher told me that it's in production, which takes actually longer than I thought, so I won't be out till November. On this, it gives you more detail about the approaches adults often take to students, and it's more in detail on this material as well. But it's this idea about starting with oneself, okay? So the first thing is be reflective. Then be a positive role model, okay? Lead by example. I remember talking with one teacher who said, I'm a teacher. My only job is to get these students to pass whatever subject. I can't remember, I'll be honest with you, I can't remember what subject he was teaching. And he said, I'm not a role model. I am who I am. And it was almost that mentality that do as I say, not as I do. Okay, I'm an adult. I've earned the right to be this way. You have to work up, kind of. But the reality was I learned that the way I was responding was teaching. And so I had to change the way I was responding and lead by example. I had to become a role model, not just with character and ethics, but also emotionally. Now, did that mean I didn't show emotions? No, it means you do show emotions, because students have to see that you're people too. And they have to see that you respond appropriately to those emotions. So if I got angry, I didn't punch somebody, I didn't throw something, I didn't hit somebody. I just let somebody know uh, in a strong manner that, hey, listen, that's not appropriate. That angered me. You know, you can't do that. Okay. So they need to see that there are positive ways to respond to things. Um, I'll give an example. The young man who said, I don't know what's wrong with me, I get angry, was at a school of mine in St. Charles, Missouri. And he came to my office one day and we were talking about um, the fact that when he got angry, he always punched. And he was making progression. He stopped punching people and started punching walls and punching things. And we were talking about this punching. And as I processed with him through the emotions of anger and stuff, I realized that this was a reaction, appropriate response to him taught in the home. That if you're angry, you can hit things. Now, his dad did not hit his mother and things like that, but I mean, they were very expressive. And so I had to become the role model for him of expressing anger in a positive way. Okay. So remember that the way you act does have a very powerful impact on a student. Become a resource. The thing to understand is you don't have to be the only resource. I was blessed at one of the schools I was at. Some of the teachers I had were really good at working with students in their emotions. And I had a great social worker who was really good at working with students in their social and emotional learning. And so I was a resource bank of places you could go to talk to, people you could go to. I established connections with other stakeholders who were not even in my building. I encouraged staff and student agency to respond with each other. But you do not have to be the only answer. If you are, then it's going to be too overwhelming and you won't be able to do it. Okay. Just like going back to that case where it's harder on the single parent because of all the other commitments they have to take on and responsibilities they have that they can't commit sometimes. Again, I didn't say it was impossible, I said it was harder. But what you want to do is find resources, just like the single parent finds resources, a neighbor, a friend, people at church or at school who play a role. Okay.
And
So go
Dr.
ahead.
Hyland, I wanted to just interrupt because we had another comment that came in. And Julie wrote in just a thought slash comment. Even when teachers don't want to be role models, they don't realize that they already are role models, whether or not that's intentional.
Yeah, and that's what I apologize. Thank you, Jude, for sharing that, because that was what I was trying to say. We are a role model whether we realize it or not. Okay. Because students will emulate that. That was, I apologize, I guess I didn't say it well enough, but I appreciate you sharing that, is you don't have to be aware that you're a role model. You are one. And I like to emphasize that. So thank you for sharing that, because whether you want to be or not, you are. You can't avoid it. Okay. Great. Thank you for sharing that. Okay. And then this is the one I have, Become a Coach. That's the book I have, The 5 Habits of the Emotion Coach. And I'm not talking about stereotype of coach. Sometimes I remember telling someone once about become a coach, and they had a bad experience in high school with a coach who was one of those yellers and demeanors. And actually, I was a coach. I quit coaching because I realized I was I got too hyper about it. But I'm talking about an emotion coach, someone who's entirely different. When I think of a coach and a good coach, I think of someone who looks at problems from different perspectives and studies them, and what works well, what doesn't work well, and then try to focus on, build on what's working well, and then try to redirect or correct what's not working well. That's what I think of a coach. When I think of a coach, so when I talk about emotion coach, that's what I'm referring to. Why is emotion coaching important to students? First and foremost, this is important. Creates a sense of trust and openness to be real. Do not assume that students have a sense of trust of adults. Many do. Those who come from strong homes have a very positive, do generally trust adults. Okay. Marvin Berkowitz in a book called You Can't Teach Through a Rat, and don't misinterpret the word rat. It has to do with a kid who has a pet rat. He loves his pet rat. Okay. He highlights 3 types of children who teachers have to deal with, who come to teachers' classrooms, not deal with. There's the golden child, and don't take this wrong. That's someone who's in a well set up home, has all the loving and caring and physical nurturing and all the nurturing they need. In general, they don't necessarily need the teacher. And I mean that they have all the supports in place. The teacher still has to be good teacher for them, but they don't have the needs of the teachers that others do. So he points out the tarnished student, the one who comes from a broken home, doesn't have the supports emotionally or even physically, sometimes nurturing mental health things they need. That student needs the teacher. And here's the thing you have to understand. Because of their experience with adults, often being very negative, it's hard for them. They need the teacher, but they're hesitant to trust the teacher. So the first thing you really have to work is the purpose of emotion coaching is to try to find a way to get the student to trust you and for you to trust the student so that you can have this openness to be real, okay? Because you want that relationship to move past the surface level, as I talked about earlier. But here's the thing about what emotion coaching really focuses on. It's learning about not just respect and responsibility, I don't know why I chose those words, but to act accordingly, as I say in the real world. That is, in other words, develop positive social skills, because it's all about how we respond, how we act on our emotions that make a difference, that define who we are. It's not that we feel the emotions, it's how we act on them. And that's what emotional intelligence is about, is acting appropriately to the emotions we feel, understanding emotions, not only in ourselves, but in others. If you really want to know about emotional intelligence, you really have to be able to read others as well as you read yourself emotionally, okay? And this is what I get to, feelings are validated. I am valid and I'm valued. This goes back to the student who says, I don't know what's wrong with me, I get angry. Well, they felt there was something invalid about that being angry. We all get angry, okay? So therefore, you're just as valid as I am. Not because you get angry, but, what we want to work on is how you respond to your anger, okay? So the important thing, why do I talk about this become an emotion coach, okay? The first thing you have to recognize is the expression of emotion is an opportunity for intimacy. If you're married, if you're in a relationship with another person, you know when that person's being emotional, that's a great moment to get intimate with them in an emotional sense and to connect with them, to know them better and to be fully known by them. That's what I'm talking about when I use this phrase intimacy, okay? I want to make sure, I'm going to reiterate that over and over, this idea of being able to be transparent, okay? I actually read a book that was interesting because they used the phrase of like Adam and Eve were fully transparent. They were naked and unafraid. Being naked and unafraid is how they referred to it. And I don't know if I could get that far, but the idea being naked and not ashamed, I'm sorry. But it's this idea of connecting with someone, to talk with the student regardless of the emotion. This was interesting when I was a principal. I found that me and my assistant principal, we would divide up our students because he did not respond well to students when they were expressing certain emotions, okay? And so I had to make sure that they would come to me when there was an issue, okay? So, because I was a little bit better at not getting impatient with the emotion, okay? In fact, I had more frustration with the student who was passive aggressive than with someone who was expressively sharing their emotions, respects the emotions of the other person. This is the thing that you have to be careful about, is telling the other person. Do not try to tell the other person how they should feel, okay? I was guilty. I wanted to catch myself sometimes. I didn't want to do what my dad do. You should be happy, I'd be sad and he'd say, you should be happy. Look at all you have. That's another one of those things that as an adult, we don't, those journeys are different. A student and a friend of ours could make a very similar comment, and we would respond differently to each one. A student may do something and you say, well, I really wanted that. I really want that. Well, you should be happy with what you have. It's wrong to do that. Whereas another student may say, another peer, another adult might say, so I really want that. And you might say, oh, I have to admit, it'd be nice to have one of those, what we have to watch out for is how we tell people how they should feel. And we don't have to feel to fix the problems. I used to share this with my staff. We are not here to fix the students' problems, okay? And why? Okay, think about why are we not here to fix the problems? Well, I'm not here to fix them. I'm here to give them the skills to solve them themselves. Because someday they're going to leave my building, they're going to graduate, they're going to move on. And I want them to have the skills to solve their own problems. Well, I will always be there. My students, there are many students I'm still connected with years later. I had a student from one of my inner city schools, my last when I was in St. Louis. He still sends me Father's Days notifications, cards and stuff. That's fine. I'm there for them. But I want them to be able to, they're on their own. They're adults now. They need to move on and be able to solve their own skills. Just as with my children. I remind my wife, and I always tease my wife, I said, hey, the Bible says we're supposed to move them out, shoot them out of the house, you know. My job is not, you're not staying in this home. My job is to get you out of my house, you know. And I joke with them, but the idea being, you will be an adult, you will move on your own. You're going to have to be able to manage your own situations. Does that mean they can't come to me when they need help? Trust me, my children do. Most often it has something to do with money, monetary help. But the idea being, you don't want to fix it because you want to give them the skills to fix it themselves. I love this phrase when we say we're going to produce lifelong learners in schools. It's really actually a silly phrase if you think about it, because you can never know. You can't measure it. Who is going to interview all these people 50 years later and say, are you a lifelong learner? What I prefer to say is we give them the skills to be lifelong learners. Let them have what they need to be equipped to do it. Okay. Listen, empathize, set expressions. I'm going to talk about all those in a second. I have to get moving for the sake of time. Okay. The thing to know about this, why I really emphasize this approach, and by the way, you need to know this is not, this is again research of a number of authors, and the phrase emotion coach is not mine. It is John Gottman's, Dr. John Gottman out of the Gottman Institute at the University of Washington. He coined the phrase, and it is he who emphasized it, and that's where I first saw it in reading, and then thought, okay, how can this be expanded to work in schools? Okay. The child learns to trust the teacher or the adult. That's the most important thing. First, we have to get them to trust us, and then to trust their own feelings, to know that it's okay to have a certain feeling, okay? But get them to solve their own problems, give them the skills necessary. Now, if you work with younger children, you're gonna have to be more active in the problem solving phase. But if you're with older high school students, they really need to process it on their own. And that's the key, is there are various levels of this. Elementary teachers will have different, be at different levels of how much they can do with this versus high school, okay? The key is you want the child to be self-confident and self-compassionate. And I think we don't use this word enough, self-compassion. If I go back to a student who, I don't know what's wrong with me, I get angry, there was a lack of compassion for himself. He was not compassionate on this. I look back and I see things I did that I get frustrated that I can't believe I did it when I was angry or when I did certain things. And I get mad at myself. I have to have some compassion for myself and learn from it and say, okay, you learn from that. It's time to move on, because the most important thing you want to do is get along with others. Again, we're about relationships here. Okay. So what are the key components? If I'm trying to do all this talk about emotion coaching, what is it? It's not a process per se, a step-by-step process, because some of it intertwines with each other. But there are 5 key components of it, okay? Teaching and building trust, empathy, setting limits, helping label, and awareness emotions. So I want to get to those and talk to those points. When we talk about emotions, there are 2 things you have to understand about being aware of emotions. There are your own personal emotions and the students. You have to realize, and I think you do, that as a teacher, you have emotions too. As a person, you have emotions, okay? So you need to be aware of your own emotions. And this goes to the statement earlier that was made by one of the guests. You're a role model. People are watching. So they learn by watching you. So the first thing I'm going to say, it's okay to express your feelings and show that you have emotions. Express disappointment. Show sadness. I said this once, show fear, and someone said to me, Well, I was told you never you never to be afraid of your students, and that's not what I meant. And I said, well, if you're afraid of your students, I got a quick cure for that. Don't be a teacher. What I mean is show a healthy fear. Show that it's okay to be afraid. Okay, because sometimes for students that's a hard thing, and some do struggle with it. I will say that, and that's a different level. I want to point this out. We're just talking about coaching emotions. This is no way makes, if you follow these processes, no way to be any assumption that you are counseling. You can serve a counseling role or psychologist role. This role is just strictly on how you can help students in the simplest phrase. So if someone has severe anxiety issues, that needs to be handled by a pro, okay, a trained professional, okay. And showing emotion does not mean others can meet your emotional needs. And I did struggle with this in one school in St. Charles, where a teacher really loved to show emotion because needed students to respond and support her and do that. And it's something you have to be cautious about because you're there for the students. Remember, they're not necessarily there for you. Okay. So then you have to be aware of theirs. And the thing to remember is emotions manifest in different ways. My wife and I do not show anger at the same time. Now, my children have learned over the years when I'm angry. They've learned when my wife is angry by watching, but we don't show them the same way. So that's one of the challenges for teachers. How well do you know your students and how they manifest their emotions? Some of you probably think right now, I can give you examples easily. That's good. You want to know your students at the level where you know their emotions and what they're feeling. Clue into it. How are students responding to that's different, you know? But here's the thing I want you to think about in this one, because I got to keep moving. Look at behaviors through the lens of emotions. One of the things I find with educators, I was guilty of it, is that when somebody acted away, it was kind of like in a vacuum. They just behaved that way because they behaved that way. I never thought it in terms that some emotional, something happened, that manifested, that created an emotion, and that what they're doing is a response to an emotion. And so when I have rules like, well, fine, you broke this rule, you get 3 days detention, and that's all we talk about. All I'm concerned about is that unilateral conversation, you know, and unidirectional. I'm not really looking at the emotions and helping them grow emotionally intelligent. I'm not dealing with the issue and saying, hey, listen, I noticed that you were angry there, okay? Well, let's talk about that or something like that, okay? And the key is you can't ignore feelings to make them go away. Teaching and building trust, okay? First thing here, no fixing needed. You're not there to tell someone anything. You're there to build trust. You want them to see you as an ally. You want them to see you in a way that, like almost like a parent. You know, I trust you. I can come to you. I know that you will keep my emotions safe, okay? And so this takes time, and there's no steps for doing it. That's why you don't see me listing any bullet points here. But what it does mean is you don't tell someone something, or I say, you need to be happy. You don't ignore them. You don't, you don't overemphasize either. You need to focus on how do I get this person to know that they can trust me, okay, and work on that. And then I always talk about listen with empathy, and I talk about this empathy versus sympathy, okay, because we have to be careful. There is a place for both, okay, but empathy is the one that builds emotional intelligence. To give you an example, student does something, gets mad, acts out because they found out something and they're hurt and they're crushed and they're broken and they act out, and the teacher says, oh, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. That's sympathy. You're fine. It's no problem. You act. Well, I understand why you act this way, and that's good. But here's the problem: the student has learned now. Oh, it's okay when I'm angry to act out. It's okay to yell out. It's okay to do this. You know, it's like if the student who I had who was angry, if he punched the wall, I could say, "It's okay. I understand. You got mad. Don't worry about it." You know, that's teaching. Oh, okay, then it's okay to punch. So sympathy has a place, but when we're talking about emotional intelligence, empathy is this. I understand you're upset, but let's talk about this and let's first get out of here and let's talk about an appropriate way to act in this way. I can see you're angry, but punching the wall may not be the best solution. Let's talk about options. Empathy is that idea that I'm going to walk with you through this, okay, and do that. And then validate statements, these ones. I hear you. I might feel the same way. That doesn't sound fun. Must not hurt. Let them know that it's okay. I understand you're angry. Okay, let's talk about it. Okay, I might have been upset too. I just don't know that I would have punched the wall. Have these conversations with students. Okay.
And just to give you 10-minute warning.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to wrap it up here because I think I have just about 3 or 4 slides. So this is what I was talking about with empathy, okay, versus sympathy. The idea that it's okay, you'll be okay. There's time for that. But when we're talking about emotional intelligence, it's understanding. Let me help you walk through this, is the concept I want to get at. Help label emotion. And I say this because students sometimes in the act don't really know what they're feeling. And sometimes they morph too. There's mixed emotions. Now, I don't have time for the question here, what 2 emotions it is. It's actually anger and fear. And why it is they become one. Sometimes when students get angry, somebody gets angry, that's because they were afraid first and then became angry, okay? Or they're actually angry and then became afraid for some reason. But, the thing is, they don't often talk in terms of language and know the intensity levels. Here you'll see I have number 3, intensity levels. There's a difference between annoyed, anger, and hate. They kind of fall under the same category at sometimes, but make sure that you're using appropriate terms. So when a student says, I hate that, well, they're being hateful. Well, is it because they're annoying you? Try to bring the intensity level to the appropriate level for the student, okay? And then help them solve problems, okay? Help them, label the emotion, then set parameters and stuff. So let me go back real quick on this with a student who punched things, okay? He had a habit of punching things, and one day he came to my office and said, well, let's talk about this, okay? Let's talk about what are potential solutions for him. He says, well, Dr. Hyland, you can get a punching bag in your office. I thought about that for a second, and while I'm thinking about it, my counselor said, that's a silly idea. And I said, why? He said, because he's still learning to punch. So I had to set parameters. Okay, we're going to look for solutions where you're not punching things, because what happens when you're out here, away from here? Discuss ramifications of possible solutions. So when my student was still punching, he was breaking his hand, and that was financial costs, okay? And talk about it, the student didn't want to come up with a solution. Well, I don't know. Well, if you don't have a solution, you're going to keep doing this, you're going to keep getting in trouble, you're going to keep going, but don't give in to the solution. Now, at younger ages, if you're in young elementary, you might say, I think you might want to consider this, okay? At older ages, you might say, well, if you're not sure, I've heard people try this. What do you think about that? But kind of have those conversations with the students, okay? And do that, because the goal is to help them learn the processing phase, okay? And most importantly, be realistic with your student and yourself about what expectations you can have. They're going to have to keep learning these, making mistakes and learning, and making mistakes and learning. So that is my presentation for you today about emotional intelligence. Hopefully you have it. I'm going to stop and pause and see what questions people may have here.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. And you did teach us a lot, as I said at the beginning. So thank you for all those insights and sharing so much of your own experiences. We do have a couple questions that came in. By all means, if you have questions, type in more. But I'll go ahead and go through them. And I'll do the last couple first, just because some of them came in a little bit earlier. So the last question that came in was, there's a lot of news lately about the effects of unconscious bias on educators. Have you seen any talks or evidence about how unconscious bias plays into our emotions as teachers?
I've not seen any, I've not had any research or seen anything on it. I've heard of it. I'm looking at it. I'm curious about it. I'm just going to be honest with you. It's a great field. I want to do more investigation in it. I think it's I will say this. I had to deal with unconscious bias I had, okay? So it's something that's real from my perspective, but its role in emotional intelligence, I not fully understand the concept of connection yet. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah. And I think it does. I mean, like you, I've also had to deal with my own unconscious biases and acknowledging them as the first start, but it makes, I think, almost sense in some ways that it would tie into our emotions as well. So great question, and I'm sure there's more work coming, right? That could be your next book.
It could be. It does. I will say that it does tie into your emotion. I just don't know. I haven't done any formal research to be more confident in my answer. Okay.
Yeah. The next question is, do you have any advice for working with emotional intelligence for students who are on the autistic spectrum?
Ooh, I've had this question before, and I've been asked to speak at conferences, and I don't. That's a real, I will say I've done very little work in that area. And that's when I say, remember the phrase, I said, become a resource. I had friends who did. So I really, I may start looking more into it because now it's the second time that's been asked of me. And I had not, when I was doing my initial work with this, I was just looking at the students in which I spent most of the time working with and who I teach now. So boy, I'm failed on the last two questions. I haven't done a lot of research in those two areas, but they're very valid questions and one that needs to be investigated further because I'm not sure. I will say that some of the students I had challenges with, it turns out they were on the spectrum, and I wasn't aware of that, and they got resource help other places.
We just have great questions coming in from our audience today, stumping people. And then another question that came in is, can you explain more about what is emotional intimacy?
Okay, so when I talk about emotional intimacy, okay, that's this idea that I can be emotionally intelligent and understand myself and understand the emotions of others, okay? But now I want to go a step further. I want to be connected. So let me give an example with my wife. We know we generally define physical intimacy, okay? But we never define emotional intimacy. My wife has emotional needs. I have emotional needs, okay? So that's outside of the physical, okay? And what it means is that she's not afraid to come to me and feel secure and sharing herself, her inner feelings, her fears, her thoughts, because sometimes we do that, even as married couples. We've been raised with a lack of emotional intelligence so that we aren't confident in being emotionally intimate. This idea that I feel confident sharing who I am fully with my wife and being fully known by her. She is fully confident in coming to me. That's the emotional intimacy. And it does not have to be a spouse. I'm using my wife as an example, but my children, okay? There are others I have a good relationship with. I have a buddy that we used to sit down and talk. Now that sounds weird when you say two guys sit down being emotionally intimate, but we could feel confident sharing at certain levels with each other how we felt about certain topics and certain things, and not be afraid that that person would use it against me or hurt me as a result. I hope that makes more sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And then another question that just came in was, can you explain the difference between emotional intelligence and an EQ?
Okay, they're interrelated. EQ is your measurement technically. I'm hesitant to know how you measure emotional intelligence per se, but I know there are scales out there. So emotional intelligence, it's kind of like academic achievement is measured by a test, and that's your test result. Your EQ is your test result that companies have out there that are out there and available, and there are some good ones out there. It's where are you strong emotionally and where you can have room for growth emotionally. So that's the difference. They're not really interchangeable. EQ measures your emotional intelligence.
Great.
It's your emotional quotient.
Okay. Well, what does the Q stand for? I'm sorry.
Quotient.
Okay, quotient. Very good. I never knew that. Thank you. And then Julie wrote in the last question on emotional intimacy. Brene Brown is a great resource, calling it vulnerability and all its shades.
I got a few quotes of hers in my book. Trust me on that. Julie, you nailed it there. That Brene Brown. I actually had. It's funny. I mentioned my social worker earlier. She actually emailed me, texted me, and I saved the text. It probably didn't sit well with my wife, but she said, "I just got to tell you." She was at a Brene Brown workshop, and she just said how connected I was with you as a boss, and how you made me feel comfortable emotionally. And so I did a lot of reading on Brene Brown, and sure you'll see her material in my work for sure. Great resource. I'm glad you mentioned that.
Well, and our last comment that came in was, thank you so much. Wonderful lessons to learn and reminders. So thank you for your time tonight. Dr. Hyland, it's been fantastic. And thank you to all of our viewers who tuned in as well. We appreciate the time you spent with us. As I mentioned, download those handouts if you're interested, fill out the survey, and know that certificate and a recording of tonight's webinar, if you want to review any other parts of it, are going to be coming your way in about an hour.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Sorry I had to speed through those last parts, but I appreciate you taking your time to be here.
Have a great night all, and we hope to see you again.
Blessings.